The sun hammered down on the alkali flats like a blacksmith working hot iron, relentless and without mercy. Heat shimmered in waves across the cracked earth, distorting the horizon until sky and ground became one molten blur. In that furnace of dust and stone, two figures moved, one on horseback, one on foot, connected by 20 feet of rope and a silence thicker than the air itself. Caleb Rourke sat easy in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the glare, eyes half-lidded but never still. He was a lean man, weathered past his years, with the kind of face that didn't invite conversation. A scar traced a pale line from his left temple to his jaw, old enough to have faded, deep enough that it never would. His hands rested light on the reins, but his right thumb stayed hooked near the leather thong that kept his colt tied down. Not nerves. Habit. Behind him, stumbling through the alkali dust with wrists bound and boots dragging, came Eli Cade. Eli was younger, maybe 30, with a rangy build and sharp features that might have been handsome once. Now they just looked worn. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, crusted with dried blood and trail grime, and his lips were cracked from thirst. But his eyes, those were still sharp, watching, calculating. He hadn't stopped looking for an out since Caleb clapped irons on him 3 days back. "Could let me ride," Eli said, his voice hoarse. "Ain't like I'm going anywhere." Oh, Caleb didn't look back. "You got feet?" "Barely." "Then use 'em slow." Eli spat into the dust. "You're a real humanitarian, Rourke." "I'm a realist." Caleb shifted in the saddle, scanning the ridgeline to the west. "Man who rides gets ideas. Man who walks gets tired. Tired men don't run." "Hell, I ain't running. Where would I go?" "Anywhere but a rope." Eli went quiet at that. The rope waiting in Santa Cruz wasn't a secret. It was the whole point. Eli Cade had a murder warrant so fresh the ink probably wasn't dry yet. He'd killed a rancher outside of Presidio over a card game, shot him twice in the back while the man was walking away. There were witnesses. There was no question. Just a date with the hangman and a bounty for the man who brought him in. That man was Caleb Rourke. The desert stretched on, empty and eternal. No trees, no shade, just scrub and stone and the skeletal remains of things that had tried to grow here and failed. Caleb's horse, a dun gelding with a Roman nose and steady legs, plodded forward without complaint. It had carried worse loads across worse ground. "How much further?" Eli asked after a while. "Far as it takes." "That's real specific." "You in a hurry to die?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Just curious how long you plan to drag this out." Caleb finally glanced back, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "Long as I need to." There was something in the way he said it, something that made Eli's eyes narrow. But before he could press, Caleb pulled up short. His hand went to the brim of his hat, tilting it back just enough to get a clearer view. Ahead, maybe a quarter-mile off, a building shimmered in the heat. Low and flat-roofed, built from adobe and rough timber, it squatted beside what used to be a stage road. The sign hanging crooked over the door was too faded to read, but Caleb didn't need to. He knew what it was, a way station, or what was left of one. Eli followed his gaze. "We stopping?" "Maybe." "Jesus, Rourke, you're a fountain of information." Caleb ignored him and nudged the dun forward. As they approached, details sharpened. The station's windows were shuttered, one door hung askew on broken hinges, and the corral fence had collapsed in places. But there was a well, and where there was a well, there might be water. More importantly, there was a horse. A bay mare stood tied to a post near the well, head low, flanks streaked with dried sweat. Saddle still on. Reins just looped, not secured. Whoever rode her had stopped in a hurry and hadn't bothered or hadn't had time to do it proper. Caleb's eyes swept the station. No movement. No sound but the creak of wind through broken wood. He dismounted slow, keeping his hand near his gun. "Stay put," he said to Eli. "Where the hell am I going to go?" Caleb didn't answer. He approached the well first, peering down into the stone-lined shaft. Dark, deep. And he dropped a pebble, wet. The splash came back faint but real. Good enough. He turned toward the station. "Hello, the house," he called. Nothing. He waited, counting breaths. Then he stepped onto the sagging porch, boots loud against the warped planks. The door that still hung gave it a push, and he slipped inside, one hand on his Colt. The interior was dim and smelled of dust and old smoke. A table, 2 chairs, one overturned, a cold stove, shelves stripped bare. In the back corner, a bedroll lay half unrolled, and beside it, a woman. She sat with her back against the wall, knees drawn up, a rifle across her lap. Her eyes snapped to him the moment he entered, and the barrel came up fast. "Far enough," she said. Caleb stopped. Raised his hands just enough to show he wasn't drawing. "Easy, just passing through. Then pass. Need water, for me and the prisoner outside." But her eyes flicked toward the door, then back. "You law?" "Bounty hunter." "Same thing out here." "Not quite." Caleb studied her. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back, face lean and sun-browned, calico dress streaked with trail dust, boots that had seen hard miles. She didn't look scared. She looked tired and angry. The kind of anger that came from being let down one too many times. "What's your name?" he asked. "Doesn't matter." "You alone?" Her jaw tightened. "What's it to you?" "That your horse outside?" A pause. Then, "No." "Whose is it?" "My husband's." Caleb glanced around the empty station. "Where is he?" "Gone." "Gone where?" Her finger stayed near the trigger. "If I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here with a rifle, would I?" "Fair point." Caleb lowered his hand slowly. "Name's Caleb Rourke. Man outside is Eli Cade. I'm taking him to Santa Cruz to hang. We'll water the horses, fill our canteens, and be gone inside an hour. You won't even know we were here." She didn't lower the rifle. "How do I know you're not lying?" "Because if I wanted to hurt you, I'd have done it already." It was blunt, but it was true, and something in her eyes told him she knew it. After a long moment, she let the barrel drop, just a little. "Mara," she said. "Mara Vance." Caleb nodded. "Mrs. Vance." "Just Mara." She stood, keeping the rifle in hand. "Help yourself to the well, but don't linger. This isn't a safe place." "Nowhere is." "Some places are worse." Caleb didn't argue. He stepped back outside where Eli still stood in the sun, hands bound, squinting at the station. "We got company?" Eli asked. "Woman inside, stranded." "Stranded how?" "Husband took off." Eli snorted. "Smart man." Caleb shot him a look. "Keep your mouth shut." He led Eli to the well and drew up a bucket. The water was cool and clean, a small mercy in a merciless land. He filled the canteens first, then let the dun drink. Eli drank straight from the bucket, greedy and desperate, water spilling down his chin. While they worked, Mara emerged from the station, rifle still in hand. She watched them with the wary stillness of someone who'd learned not to trust strangers. "How long you been here?" Caleb asked. 3 days. "Waiting on your husband?" "Waiting on anyone." She glanced toward the horizon. "Stage line's dead. Army stopped running patrols. We were supposed to meet someone in Santa Cruz, but Jacob, my husband, he rode ahead to arrange things. Said he'd be back in 2 days. And he didn't come back." "No." Caleb considered that. "You think he ran?" Mara's expression hardened. "I think something happened. Out here, something's always happening. Then I'll wait until I know which something it was." Eli, leaning against the well with his bound hands resting on the stone rim, let out a low whistle. "Lady, if your man ain't back in 3 days, he ain't coming back." Mara's eyes cut to him. "I didn't ask you." "Just saying," Eli shrugged. 3 days is long enough to get to Santa Cruz and back twice. Either he's dead or he's gone. Either way, you're wasting your time." "Eli," Caleb said quietly. "What?" "It's true." Mara's grip on the rifle tightened. "You don't know a damn thing about him." "I know men, and I know this country. It eats people." Before Mara could respond, Caleb stepped between them. "That's enough." Eli smirked but went quiet. Caleb turned back to Mara. "You can't stay here." "I'm not leaving." "Then you'll die here." "Maybe." Her voice was flat. "But I'm not walking away until I know." Caleb recognized that tone. It was the sound of someone who'd already made peace with a bad decision and wasn't looking for permission to change it. He'd heard it before, in other voices, in other places. Hell, he'd used it himself. Suit yourself, he said. He gathered the canteens and checked the Dun's girth. We'll be moving on. Mara nodded. Safe travels. Caleb was halfway to the saddle when he stopped. Something gnawed at him. Not guilt, exactly. More like the weight of a choice he hadn't made yet but could feel coming. He turned back. You know how to use that rifle? Well enough. You ever shot a man? She hesitated. No. Then you're a liability. Out here, hesitation gets you killed. I'll manage. Maybe. Caleb studied her a moment longer, then sighed. Santa Cruz is 2 days north. If you want to look for your husband, that's where you start. You're welcome to ride with us that far. Mara blinked, clearly surprised. Why would you do that? Because leaving you here is the same as putting a bullet in you myself, and I've got enough on my conscience. Eli groaned. Oh, hell no. We ain't playing nursemaid to some lost wife. Caleb didn't look at him. Wasn't asking your opinion. She'll slow us down. So do you. At least she doesn't whine. Mara's lips twitched, almost a smile. She looked at Caleb, then at Eli, then back at the empty station behind her. Finally, she nodded. All right, I'll ride with you. Good, get your things. She disappeared inside and Eli leaned close, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake, Rourke. Probably. She's dead weight, and if her husband's out there, we might run into him. That's more trouble than we need. Caleb met his eyes. Everything's trouble. At least this way. I can see it coming. Mara returned a few minutes later with a saddlebag and a bedroll. She tied them to her husband's bay, checked the rifle one more time, and swung into the saddle with practiced ease. Caleb mounted the Dun. Stay close. Don't wander. If I say move, you move. Understood? Understood. Eli, still on foot, shook his head. This is going to end bad. It was always going to end bad, Caleb said. Let's just see how bad. They rode north. Tut. The land didn't improve. If anything, it got meaner. The alkali flats gave way to broken rock and scattered creosote, the kind of terrain that punished horses and riders alike. The sun climbed higher, hotter, and the air shimmered like water that wasn't there. They didn't talk much. Mara rode beside Caleb, her eyes scanning the horizon with the focus of someone looking for something specific. Eli trudged behind, muttering curses under his breath, but smart enough not to push too hard. By midday, the heat was brutal. Caleb called a halt in the shadow of a low ridge. Not much shade, but better than nothing. They rationed water, ate jerky that tasted like leather, and rested the horses. Mara sat apart, rifle across her knees, staring north. You really think he's alive? Caleb asked. She didn't look at him. I have to. Hope's expensive out here. So's giving up. Caleb couldn't argue with that. He leaned back against the rock, hat over his eyes, and let the silence settle. That's when Eli spoke up. We're being followed. Caleb's eyes opened. How long? Since the station, maybe before. Caleb sat up slowly, scanning the ridgeline. He didn't see anything, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. How many? He asked. 2, I think. Staying back, keeping low. Mara turned sharply. Who? Don't know yet, Caleb said. He stood brushing dust from his coat, but we're about to find out. He didn't draw his gun, not yet. Instead, he walked to the edge of the ridge and looked back the way they'd come. The land was empty, or seemed to be. But Eli had good eyes. If he said they were being followed, they were being followed. Caleb waited. And then, like ghosts rising from the heat, 2 riders appeared. They came slow, hands visible, making no attempt to hide. Both were young, early 20s maybe. One was tall and rail-thin, the other shorter and stockier. They wore trail-worn clothes and carried themselves with the nervous energy of men who wanted something but weren't sure how to ask for it. Caleb stepped into the open. That's far enough. They stopped about 50 yards out. The tall one raised a hand. We ain't looking for trouble. Then turn around. Can't do that. The shorter one shifted in his saddle. We got business with you. I don't know you. Name's Finn Darrow. This here's my cousin, Boone. Finn gestured to the tall one. We're heading to Santa Cruz, same as you. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Why? Because you got something we need. And what's that? Finn glanced at Boone, then back. Eli Cade. Eli, still sitting in the shade, went very still. Caleb didn't move. He's spoken for. We know. Bounty's 500. We ain't here to take him from you. Then what do you want? A deal. Finn leaned forward in his saddle. We turned Cade in together, split the bounty. But more than that, there's a pardon attached, full and clear. Army's offering it to anyone who brings in a Cade alive. Caleb's jaw tightened. A pardon for what? For us. We got into some trouble down in El Paso. Nothing violent, just bad choices. We turn in Eli. The Army wipes it clean. And you think I'm going to let you ride along and claim half the credit? We ain't asking for half. Boone spoke up now, his voice rougher than Finn's. We just want the pardon. You keep the money, all of it. Caleb studied them. They were desperate. He could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. Desperate men did stupid things, but they weren't lying. The Army had been offering pardons for Cades ever since Silas Cade and his gang started tearing through the territory. Eli was small-time compared to his brother, but a Cade was a Cade. No, Caleb said. Finn blinked. What? I said no, this is my job. You want a pardon? Find your own Cade. There ain't any others left. Silas killed most of them, and the rest scattered. Not my problem. Boone's face darkened. Look, Rourke. That's Mr. Rourke, and I'm done talking. He turned his back on them and walked toward the horses. Finn called after him. We're coming with you whether you like it or not. Caleb stopped, turned. His hand hovered near his gun. You try to follow me, I'll put you in the ground. The two men stared at him, weighing their options. Finally, Finn raised his hands. All right. We'll keep our distance. You do that. Caleb mounted up. Mara and Eli followed suit, Eli back on his feet, rope in Caleb's hand. As they rode out, Caleb glanced back once. Finn and Boone were still there, watching, and they weren't leaving. Mara leaned close. They're going to follow us. I know. What are you going to do? Caleb's eyes stayed on the horizon. Nothing. Yet. Because the truth was, Finn and Boone were the least of his worries. Somewhere out there, moving through the same burning wasteland, was a man who made bounty hunters and drifters look like choir boys. Silas Cade, Eli's brother. And he was coming. Caleb could feel it in his bones, the way a man feels a storm before the first clouds gather. Silas wasn't just hunting his brother, he was hunting him. And when they met, one of them wasn't walking away. Caleb adjusted his hat and kept riding. The desert stretched on, endless and unforgiving, and somewhere ahead, at a place called Hangtree Ridge, a reckoning waited. They made camp that night in a dry wash, sheltered from the wind but exposed to the sky. No fire. Too risky. Instead, they ate cold rations and rationed water, then settled in for a restless sleep. Caleb took first watch, sitting with his back to a boulder and his rifle across his knees. The stars were sharp and cold overhead, so many they seemed to crowd each other out. He'd always liked the night. It was honest, no pretense, just darkness and distance. Mara sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Can't sleep? Caleb asked. Not much point. I'll just lie there thinking. About your husband? About everything. Caleb nodded. He understood that. After a while, she spoke again. Why are you really doing this? Doing what? Taking me along. You didn't have to. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, A long time ago, I left someone behind. Told myself it was the smart play. The safe play. And they died. He didn't look at her. I don't leave people anymore. Mara absorbed that. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was my choice. They sat in silence after that, the night pressing in around them. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called, and somewhere farther still, a man named Silas Cade rode closer. Caleb closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. He was done running. Now, he was waiting. Dawn came slow and red, painting the desert in shades of rust and blood. Caleb was already awake when the first light touched the rim of the wash, had been for hours, watching the shadows retreat and the world take shape again. He'd learned long ago that the hours before sunrise were when men got careless, when exhaustion overrode caution. But nothing had moved in the darkness except the wind and his own thoughts. Mara stirred first, sitting up with the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair had come loose during the night, falling in dark waves around her face. She looked older in the morning light, the lines around her eyes deeper, the weight of worry settling in. "Any sign of them?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "The drifters?" "No, but they're out there." "How can you be sure?" "Because they need what we've got more than they need pride." Caleb stood, working the stiffness from his shoulders. Men like that don't give up easy. They just get quieter about it. Eli was still asleep, or pretending to be, his hands bound to a stake Caleb had driven into the ground. His breathing was steady, his face slack. Caleb nudged him with his boot. "Up!" Eli groaned. 5 more minutes. "Up, now!" "Christ, Rourke, you're worse than a rooster." "Roosters don't put bullets in people who waste their time." Eli opened one eye, saw the expression on Caleb's face, and decided not to push his luck. He sat up slowly, joints popping, and waited while Caleb untied him from the stake. The rope between his wrists stayed secure. They broke camp in silence, each of them moving through the familiar rhythm of rolling bedrolls, checking gear, and preparing for another day of hard riding. Caleb watched Mara work. Efficient, practiced. She handled the bay like someone who'd grown up around horses, checking hooves, adjusting the saddle with the kind of attention that spoke of genuine care. "You ride well," he said. "My father bred horses. I was on one before I could walk properly." "That how you met your husband? Through horses?" She paused, her hand resting on the bay's neck. "No. I met Jacob at a dance in Tucson. He was working for a freight company, running supplies up from Mexico. He had big plans, always big plans. Said we'd have our own ranch someday, up north where the grass grows thick and the water runs clean. And we've been chasing that dream for 6 years, moving from one dying town to the next, always one deal away from making it happen." She tightened the girth strap with more force than necessary. "I stopped believing in it about 3 years ago. But Jacob never did. That's why he rode ahead. He thought he'd found someone in Santa Cruz who could help us. You think he found trouble instead. I think he found exactly what he always finds: disappointment." There was bitterness in her voice, but beneath it, something else. Not quite hope, but not surrender either. Just the stubborn refusal to walk away until she knew for certain. Caleb understood that better than he cared to admit. They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, the temperature already climbing. The land opened up before them, vast and indifferent, a labyrinth of arroyos and mesas that stretched toward mountains so distant they looked painted on the sky. Caleb set a steady pace, not pushing hard but not lingering either. Every mile north was a mile closer to Santa Cruz, and every mile closer to Santa Cruz was a mile closer to Silas. Eli walked behind the horses, the rope connecting him to Caleb's saddle horn, keeping him at a fixed distance. He'd stopped complaining about walking, saving his energy instead. Smart. The heat would sap strength faster than anything else out here. Around mid-morning, they found the first sign. Caleb saw it before the others, a dark shape on the ground ahead, too regular to be natural. He raised a hand, signaling a halt, and dismounted. Mara stayed in the saddle, rifle ready, while Eli stood where he was, squinting at whatever Caleb was examining. It was a cairn, stones piled waist-high in a rough pyramid, the kind travelers built to mark graves or boundaries. But this one had something else. Tied to the topmost stone with strips of rawhide were 3 objects: a rusted cavalry spur, a woman's comb, and a small wooden cross. Caleb studied them without touching. The spur was old, the rowel frozen with corrosion. The comb had a crack running through it. The cross was crudely made, the kind someone might carve in an hour with nothing but a knife and desperation. "What is it?" Mara called. "Marker? For what?" "Depends who built it." Caleb straightened, scanning the surrounding terrain. The cairn sat at the junction of 2 old trails, barely visible now beneath years of wind-blown sand. Could be a grave, could be a warning. Warning about what? That we're not alone out here. Eli spat into the dust. "We already knew that." Not drifters. Something else." Caleb remounted, his eyes still on the cairn. "Apache, maybe. Or worse." Mara's grip on her rifle tightened. I thought the Apache hadn't raided this far south in years. They haven't, but that doesn't mean they're gone. And desperate times make desperate men, Indian or white. They moved on, leaving the cairn behind, but the mood had shifted. The easy silence of the morning was replaced by tension, everyone's eyes scanning the ridgelines and draws. The land itself seemed to press in, watchful and waiting. An hour later, they found the second sign. This time it was tracks. Fresh ones. 3 horses, unshod, moving fast from east to west, cutting directly across their path. Caleb dismounted again, kneeling to study the prints. The soil here was softer, holding shape better than the hardpan they'd crossed earlier. How old? Mara asked. Hours? Maybe less. He stood following the line of tracks with his eyes. They disappeared into a narrow canyon to the west, shadow swallowing them whole. They're not hunting. They're running. From what? Or toward what? Caleb swung back into the saddle. Either way, we stay clear. But staying clear wasn't as simple as it sounded. The canyon the tracks led into was the same canyon their trail skirted. To avoid it entirely would mean adding half a day to the journey, pushing them farther from water and deeper into open country. To follow the trail meant risking whatever had sent those riders running. Caleb weighed the options in silence, aware that Mara was watching him, waiting for a decision. We keep to the trail, he said finally, but we stay alert. Any sign of trouble, we don't hesitate. We run. Mara nodded. Eli, for once, said nothing. They entered the canyon in single file, Caleb leading, Mara behind him, Eli on foot bringing up the rear. The walls rose steep and sheer on either side, sandstone worn smooth by centuries of wind and flash floods. The air was cooler here, trapped between the rock faces, but it carried an edge, a metallic taste that put Caleb's nerves on wire. Halfway through, they found the horses. All 3 of them, dead. They lay sprawled across the canyon floor, their bodies already beginning to bloat in the heat. Arrows jutted from their flanks and necks, the shafts plain wood with no markings, the fletching simple crow feathers. One horse had been gutted, its entrails spilling across the sand. The others had simply been killed and left. Mara turned her head away, her face pale. Why would they do this? They didn't want the horses, Caleb said. They wanted whoever was riding them to walk. That's cruel. It's practical. Man on foot can't run, can't fight, can't do much of anything except die slow. Eli stared at the carcasses, his expression unreadable. You think those riders made it out? No. How do you know? Caleb pointed toward the far end of the canyon. There, barely visible against the rock, were dark stains splashed across the stone. Blood. A lot of it. And beside the stains, a single boot tipped on its side, the leather still damp. They didn't make it 10 yards, Caleb said. Mara's voice was tight. Are they still here? The bodies? Probably dragged off. Scavengers will take care of the rest. I meant whoever did this. Caleb scanned the rim of the canyon, the shadows pooling in the crevices and overhangs. If they were going to hit us, they'd have done it already. We're not worth the arrows. How comforting. It's not comfort, it's fact. He urged the dun forward, stepping carefully around the dead horses. Let's move. I don't want to be in here any longer than we have to. They cleared the canyon without incident, but the damage was done. The easy rhythm of the ride was gone, replaced by a constant, grinding vigilance. Every shadow was suspect. Every sound carried weight. Mara rode with her rifle across her lap now, her knuckles white on the stock. Even Eli had gone quiet, his eyes darting toward every rock and rise. By early afternoon, the land opened up again, the canyon giving way to a broad basin ringed by low hills. In the center of the basin, like a wound on the earth, was a dry lake bed, cracked and white with alkali, shimmering under the relentless sun. Caleb called a halt at the edge of the basin. We'll rest the horses here, he said. 10 minutes. Mara dismounted gratefully, her legs unsteady after hours in the saddle. She led the bay to a patch of sparse grass and let it graze while she stretched, working feeling back into her back and shoulders. Eli sat in the dirt, his bound hands resting on his knees. You know they're still following us, right? Caleb didn't look at him. Who? Finn and Boone. I saw them an hour back, staying on the ridgeline. They're good at hiding, but not good enough. I know. You gonna do something about it? Not yet. Why not? Because they're not the problem. Eli frowned. Then what is? Caleb finally looked at him, his eyes cold and flat. Your brother. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Eli's face went very still, the cocky edge draining out of him. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost careful. Silas doesn't know you've got me. He knows. How? Because word travels, and because men like your brother don't leave family to twist in the wind. He's coming, Eli. Question is when. Eli licked his cracked lips. If Silas catches up to us, he'll kill you. Maybe. No. Maybe about it. He's faster than you, meaner than you, and he doesn't fight fair. Neither do I. You don't understand. Silas isn't like other men. Eli stopped, searching for the word. He's broken. Inside. Where it counts. He doesn't care about dying. He doesn't care about anything except what's his. And I'm his. Caleb turned away, adjusting the dun saddle. Then I guess he'll have to come take you. Mara had been listening, her face drawn. Why would you let him catch up? If you know he's coming, why not ride faster, push harder? Because running just delays it. Caleb tightened the girth, his movements deliberate. And I'm done delaying. That's insane. That's honest. He swung into the saddle. I'm not dragging this out any longer than it has to be. When Silas comes, we settle it, one way or another. You're using us as bait, Eli said, his voice rising. You're slowing down on purpose, giving him time to catch up. Caleb didn't deny it. He just nudged the dun forward, and after a moment, Mara followed. Eli stood alone in the dirt, staring after them, before the rope jerked tight and pulled him stumbling into motion. You're gonna get us all killed, he shouted. Caleb's voice drifted back, flat and final. We were all dead the moment you put a bullet in that rancher. I'm just choosing where it happens. They crossed the alkali flats in silence, the white crust crunching beneath the horses' hooves. The heat was savage here, reflecting off the salt until the air itself seemed to burn. Mara pulled a bandana over her nose and mouth, her eyes streaming from the glare. Caleb rode with his hat low, his gaze fixed on the far side of the basin where the land rose again into broken hills. When they finally reached solid ground, Mara broke the silence. You have a death wish, Rourke? No. Could have fooled me. I've got unfinished business. That's different. What kind of business? Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, the kind that doesn't let you sleep. Mara wanted to press, but something in his tone made her stop. Instead, she rode beside him, matching his pace, and let the silence return. As the afternoon wore on, the land grew more hostile. The hills became ridges, the ridges became cliffs, and the trail narrowed to a switchback path that climbed steadily upward. The horses labored, their breath coming hard, flanks dark with sweat. Caleb pushed them as far as he dared, then called another halt in the shadow of an overhang. While the animals rested, he climbed to a vantage point and glassed the back trail with a small brass spyglass. The desert stretched out below, empty and shimmering, the heat turning distance into illusion. But illusion or not, he saw them. 2 riders. Miles back, but coming steady. Finn and Boone still trailing like dogs following a scent. And farther still, almost lost in the haze, another shape. Moving alone. Moving fast. Caleb's jaw tightened. He collapsed the spyglass and climbed back down. We've got company, he said. Mara stood. The drifters? Them. And one more. Eli, slumped against the rock wall, lifted his head. Silas? Can't say for sure, but it's a lone rider, and he's moving like he knows where he's going. Eli's face went pale. It's him. It's gotta be. Then we keep moving. Caleb checked his Colt, spinning the cylinder, then holstering it again. We've got maybe half a day's lead. We use it smart. We can choose the ground. Choose it for what? Mara asked. Caleb met her eyes. For what comes next. They rode through the late afternoon and into the early evening, the sun sinking toward the western peaks, turning the sky orange and purple. The trail climbed higher, winding through a maze of stone pillars and narrow defiles. Caleb pushed the pace now, no longer conserving the horses, driving them toward something only he could see. Finally, as the last light bled from the sky, they crested a rise and looked down into a shallow valley. And there, in the center, standing alone against the darkening horizon, was a tree. It was dead. Had been for years, maybe decades. The trunk was thick and gnarled, the branches skeletal, reaching toward the sky like the fingers of a drowning man. The bark had peeled away in long strips, leaving the wood beneath gray and smooth as bone. But what made it unmistakable, what gave it its name, was the single branch that jutted out from the trunk at shoulder height, worn smooth by rope. Hangtree Ridge. Mara stared at it, her throat tight. "That's where you're planning to make your stand?" Caleb nodded. "It's as good a place as any. It's a death trap. Only if you're on the wrong side of it." Eli's voice was hoarse. "You're insane, Rourke. You bring Silas here, he'll gut you and leave you hanging from that tree." "Maybe." Caleb dismounted, his boots crunching on the rocky ground. "But at least I'll see him coming." He walked toward the tree, his silhouette dark against the fading light. Mara watched him go, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She didn't know what Caleb Rourke was planning, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever it was going to end in blood. The tree stood like a monument to forgotten violence, its branches reaching into the deepening twilight as if trying to claw back the light. Caleb circled it slowly, his boots scuffing against loose stone, his eyes measuring angles and distances with the cold precision of a man preparing a battlefield. The valley around Hangtree Ridge was broad but not open, rimmed with low ridges and scattered boulders that would provide cover for anyone approaching, or anyone defending. Mara dismounted and walked to the edge of the ridge, looking down into the valley floor. The land dropped away in a series of rocky shelves, creating natural choke points that would slow anyone trying to climb up. Smart terrain if you were holding it. A killing ground if you weren't. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice barely carrying over the wind that had picked up as the sun fell. Caleb stopped beside the tree, running his hand along the worn branch where countless ropes had bitten into the wood. 4 hours. Maybe 5 if they make camp for the night. And if they don't? Then less. Eli stood where Caleb had left him, still bound, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "You can't do this. You can't just stand here and wait for him to come kill us all." "I'm not waiting for him to kill us." Caleb turned, his eyes catching the last rays of sunlight, turning them hard and bright. "I'm waiting for him to try." "What's the difference?" "Intent." Caleb walked back to his horse and began unpacking his saddlebags with methodical care. Extra ammunition for the Colt and the Winchester, a length of rope, a leather pouch containing jerky and hardtack, a small tin of lucifer matches. "You think I brought you all this way just to hand you over to Santa Cruz and collect $500? That's what bounty hunters do. Most of them." Caleb set his rifle against a rock, checking the action one more time before laying out the ammunition in neat rows. "But I stopped being most bounty hunters about 3 years ago." Mara watched him work, recognition slowly dawning in her eyes. "You knew Silas would come. You've been counting on it. Since the moment I found Eli in that cantina in Presidio." Eli's voice cracked. "You used me as bait. I used you as exactly what you are. Leverage." Caleb straightened, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Your brother took something from me a long time ago. Now I'm taking something from him." "What did he take?" Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something dark and old and unforgiving. "Everything that mattered." The words fell into silence, heavy as stones. Mara wanted to ask more, needed to understand what kind of man would orchestrate his own execution just for a chance at revenge. But before she could speak, Eli did. 3 years ago, he said slowly, working it out. "The ranch outside of Amarillo. The fire." Caleb went very still. "That was you," Eli continued, his voice gaining strength as the pieces fell together. "You were the foreman, the one who tried to stop Silas when he rode in with his men. The one who—" He stopped, his face going white. "Oh, hell. The woman. The one who died in the fire. That was your wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Caleb didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He just stood there, his hand still resting on his gun, his eyes locked on something far beyond the valley, far beyond the present moment. Finally, he spoke. Her name was Sarah, and she didn't just die. She burned because your brother needed to send a message to the rancher who owned that land. A message written in smoke and screaming. His voice was flat, empty of everything except the weight of memory. I was in the barn when it started. By the time I got to the house, it was too late. The doors were barred from the outside. I could hear her inside calling my name. He paused. That was the last time I heard her voice. Mara's hand went to her mouth, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Eli looked like he might be sick. Silas never told me. He just said there was trouble at a ranch, that we had to move fast. I didn't know what... You didn't ask. Caleb's words cut like a blade. None of you ever asked. You just rode with him, did what he told you, took what he took. And when the screaming stopped, you moved on to the next town, the next ranch, the next victim. I never killed anyone who didn't draw on me first. You think that makes you innocent? You rode with him. That makes you complicit in every life he's taken, every family he's destroyed. Caleb took a step forward, his shadow falling across Eli like a judgment. You want to know why I'm doing this? Because every night for 3 years, I've heard her voice. Every time I close my eyes, I smell that smoke. And every morning I wake up knowing that somewhere out there, Silas Cade is still breathing while she's in the ground. So this is revenge. This is balance. Mara found her voice, though it shook. And us? What are we to you? Just more pieces on the board? Caleb turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something almost like regret in his eyes. You're collateral. I won't lie about that. But I gave you a choice back at the station. You could have stayed. You chose to ride with me. Because I trusted you to get me to Santa Cruz. And I will, after this is done. If we're still alive. That's the risk you took. The wind picked up again, colder now, carrying the smell of dust and distant rain that would never fall. Mara stood there, her rifle held loose in her hands, torn between anger at being used and understanding of the broken man standing before her. She'd lost things too, not a wife. Not like that. But she understood the weight of absence, the way it hollowed you out and filled the empty spaces with something harder and darker. What do you need us to do? She asked finally. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his eyes. When they come, stay behind cover. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target. And if things go wrong, run, she finished. I know. He nodded. Then he turned to Eli. You're going under that tree. When Silas gets here, he'll see you first. That's the whole point. You're going to hang me to draw him out. I'm going to put a rope around your neck. Whether I pull it tight depends on how this plays out. Eli's laugh was bitter and broken. You're a real piece of work, Rourke. I'm what your brother made me. Caleb grabbed the length of rope from his pack. Now move. He marched Eli to the tree, positioning him directly beneath the hanging branch. The process was efficient and cold. Caleb fashioned a noose, tested its strength, then looped it over the branch and let it hang at chest height. Eli stood rigid, his breathing shallow, as Caleb fitted the noose around his neck and drew it snug enough to hold, but not tight enough to choke. How's that feel? Caleb asked. How do you think it feels? Good. Remember that feeling when your brother gets here. Might keep you honest. Caleb stepped back, surveying his work with the detached eye of a carpenter examining a joint. Satisfied, he turned his attention to the rest of the valley, selecting positions for Mara and himself. He placed her behind a cluster of boulders on the eastern side of the ridge, with a clear view of the approach and good cover from return fire. You know how to use that rifle? He asked. I told you before. Well enough. Well enough isn't good enough. Can you hit what you aim at? Mara's jaw tightened. Yes. Then prove it. He pointed to a small cairn of stones about 50 yards down the slope. Center rock. Take your time. She looked at him, then at the cairn, then brought the rifle to her shoulder with smooth, practiced motion. She breathed in, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, echoing off the ridge walls, and the center stone exploded into fragments. Caleb nodded. Good. When the shooting starts, pick your targets. Don't waste ammunition trying to suppress. Make every shot count. And you? He pointed to a position on the opposite side of the valley, elevated and with a commanding view of the entire killing ground. I'll be up there. If they split up, I can cover both approaches. If they come straight up the middle, I'll have crossfire with you. What about Finn and Boone? What about them? They're still out there. If they arrive in the middle of this, then they chose bad timing. Caleb checked his rifle again, more out of habit than necessity. Look, I can't control every variable. Best I can do is stack the odds and hope they fall the right way. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to point out the 100 things that could go wrong with his plan, but she could see in his face that he'd already considered them all. This wasn't recklessness. It was calculation, cold, precise, and utterly committed. She just hoped the mathematics worked in their favor. As full darkness settled over the valley, Caleb built a small fire near the tree, just enough to provide light without giving away their exact positions. The flames cast dancing shadows across Eli's face, making him look like a ghost already. He stood beneath the noose, his head bowed, lips moving in what might have been prayer, or might have been curses. Hard to tell in the flickering light. Caleb took his position on the high ground, settling into the rocks with his rifle cradled in his arms. From here he could see the entire valley, the approaches on all sides, the fire burning below like a beacon, like a challenge. "Come and take him," the fire said, "if you can." The hours crawled past. Mara huddled behind her rocks, the rifle across her knees, fighting the urge to sleep. The temperature dropped steadily, the desert giving back all the heat it had stolen during the day. She wrapped her blanket tighter and watched the fire burn lower. Around midnight, she heard movement, soft, careful. The scrape of boot on stone somewhere down the slope. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She eased the rifle up, peering into the darkness beyond the firelight, trying to separate shadow from substance. Then Caleb's voice, low and carrying just far enough, "I see them." Mara's finger found the trigger. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, to remember everything her father had taught her about shooting in low light. Aim center mass. Don't rush. Let them come to you. Two figures emerged from the darkness at the base of the valley, not rushing, not sneaking, just walking, steady and deliberate, their hands visible and empty. Finn and Boone. Caleb's rifle tracked them as they approached, his finger resting on the trigger guard, ready but not committed. When they were 30 feet from the fire, he called down, "That's far enough." They stopped. Finn raised his hand slightly, showing he wasn't armed. Boone did the same, though his eyes never stopped scanning the ridge, looking for Caleb's position. "We're not here for trouble," Finn said. "Then you took a wrong turn. This is all trouble. We just want to talk." "So talk." Finn glanced at Eli, at the noose around his neck, and understanding dawned on his face. "You're using him as bait, observant, for his brother." "Very observant," Boone spoke up, his voice rougher, more urgent. "Then you're a damn fool. Silas Cade doesn't negotiate, he doesn't talk, he just kills." "I'm counting on it." Finn and Boone exchanged a look. Then Finn took a half step forward, his voice dropping to something almost pleading. "Listen to me, Rourke. We followed you because we need that pardon. But we're not stupid. If Silas shows up here, this whole ridge turns into a graveyard. Let us take Eli now. We'll get him to Santa Cruz, you walk away clean, and nobody has to die." "Everybody dies," Caleb said. "It's just a question of when and why." "That's insane." "That's honest." There was a pause, then Caleb's voice came again, colder now. "You've got 10 seconds to turn around and ride out. After that, your target's same as anyone else." "We're not leaving without—" The crack of Caleb's rifle cut him off. The bullet struck the ground 2 feet in front of Finn, kicking up a spray of dirt and rock. 9 seconds. Finn stumbled back, hands still raised. All right, we're going." They backed away slowly, keeping their hands visible, their eyes locked on the darkness where Caleb's muzzle flash had briefly revealed his position. When they reached the edge of the firelight, they turned and hurried down the slope, their boots sliding on loose stone. Caleb watched them disappear into the night. Then he settled back into his position, rifle ready, and waited. Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "They'll be back." "Maybe, but not tonight." "How can you be sure?" "Because they're smart enough to know when they're outgunned. They'll wait and see how this plays out. If we win, they'll try to claim Eli from the aftermath. If we lose, they'll scavenge what's left." "That's cold. That's survival." The fire burned lower. the flame shrinking to coals that pulsed like a heartbeat in the darkness. Eli shifted position, trying to ease the strain on his neck from the noose, and the rope creaked against the branch. The sound was small, almost insignificant, but in the silence of the valley, it carried like a scream. Another hour passed, then another. The moon rose, a thin crescent that provided just enough light to see shapes but not details. Perfect for an ambush, perfect for death to come walking out of the shadows, wearing a friendly face. Caleb felt it before he heard it, the subtle shift in the air, the way the night seemed to hold its breath. He tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes scanning the valley floor. And there, at the far edge where moonlight met shadow, something moved. Not Finn, not Boone. Someone else. A single rider, sitting easy in the saddle, silhouetted against the stars. He didn't hurry, didn't hide. He just rode forward at a walk, letting the moonlight catch him, making no attempt at stealth. Because he didn't need to. Silas Cade had arrived. He was bigger than Caleb remembered, or maybe grief had made memory cruel. Broad across the shoulders, with long arms and a frame built for violence. He wore a duster that hung to his knees, dark fabric that blended with the night, and a hat with a wide brim that shadowed his face. But even without seeing his features, Caleb knew him, would have known him anywhere. Silas rode to the edge of the firelight and stopped. For a long moment, he just sat there, looking at his brother standing beneath the noose. Then he dismounted, moving with the fluid grace of a predator, and walked forward until the firelight caught his face. He was handsome in the way a knife was handsome, all sharp edges and cold purpose, dark eyes that reflected the firelight without warmth, a mouth set in a line that might have been a smile or might have been something worse. He looked at Eli, at the noose, at the careful arrangement of the scene, and his expression didn't change. "Hello, little brother," he said. His voice was smooth, almost gentle. That made it worse. Eli's voice cracked. "Silas, don't! Quiet!" Silas raised a hand and Eli went silent. Then Silas turned, slowly, surveying the ridge. "I know you're up there, Rourke. I can feel you watching." Caleb didn't answer, didn't move. Let the silence do the talking. Silas smiled then, and it was a terrible thing to see. 3 years. You've been hunting my men, picking them off one by one. I wondered when you'd get around to me." He walked closer to the fire, his hands loose at his sides. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the pattern? Every man you took was one of mine. Every bounty you collected was a message." Still Caleb said nothing. "So here we are?" Silas stopped directly beneath the hanging tree, looking up at Eli. "You put a noose around my brother's neck, thinking it would make me careless, thinking I'd rush in angry and stupid." He shook his head slowly. "You don't know me as well as you think." "I know you well enough," Caleb said, his voice carrying from the darkness. "I know you burn families to send messages. I know you take what you want and leave the rest to rot. And I know that 3 years ago you took everything from me. The woman." Silas nodded, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "The one in Amarillo. I remember her. She had fight in her right to the end." Mara heard Caleb's breath catch, saw his shadow shift against the rocks. "You barred the doors," Caleb said, and his voice was different now, stripped of everything except raw pain. "You made sure she couldn't get out. I needed the rancher to understand the cost of defiance. She was the cost." Silas spread his hands. "Nothing personal, just business." "Her name was Sarah." "Was it?" Silas seemed genuinely curious. "I never asked." The rifle shot cracked across the valley like thunder. Silas moved the instant before Caleb pulled the trigger, dropping into a roll that carried him behind a boulder. The bullet struck where he'd been standing, kicking up sparks from the stone. And then all hell broke loose. Mara saw muzzle flashes bloom in the darkness on the far side of the valley. 4, maybe 5 shooters, positioned in a loose arc that had been invisible until the moment they opened fire. Silas hadn't come alone. He'd brought his men, hidden them in the approach, and waited for Caleb to reveal his position. Bullets whined off the rocks around Caleb's position, forcing him to duck and move. He fired twice more, controlled bursts aimed at the flashes, then scrambled to new cover as return fire tore chunks from the stone where he'd been crouched. Mara brought her rifle up and sighted on one of the flashes. She exhaled and squeezed, felt the kick against her shoulder, saw the flash wink out. Whether she'd hit the shooter or just made him reconsider his position, she couldn't tell. She worked the lever, chambering another round, and shifted her aim. Eli screamed something, his voice lost in the gunfire. The noose jerked tight as he tried to move, tried to drop to the ground for cover, but Caleb had tied him well. He could move a few feet, but not enough to escape the light. Silas reappeared, moving fast and low, firing as he came. His first shot clipped the rock beside Mara's head, showering her with stone chips. She flinched, nearly dropped the rifle, then forced herself steady and returned fire. 2 shots, fast and close, driving him back into cover. Caleb had moved to a new position, higher up the ridge, where he had a better angle on the shooters below. His Winchester barked 3 times in rapid succession, and one of the muzzle flashes died with a strangled scream. The odds shifted slightly, but only slightly. Silas's men were good. They didn't panic, didn't rush. They moved in coordinated bursts, laying down covering fire while advancing position by position. Professional, military, maybe, or close enough that the difference didn't matter. And Silas himself was a nightmare made flesh. He moved through the chaos like smoke, there and gone, appearing where he shouldn't be, firing with calm precision. He put 2 rounds through Mara's cover, forcing her to abandon her position and scramble to new ground. By the time she'd settled and brought her rifle back up, he'd vanished again. The fight raged for minutes that felt like hours. Fire and thunder and the smell of gunpowder thick enough to choke on. Caleb picked off another of Silas's men, watched him tumble down the slope in a loose sprawl of limbs. But the others kept coming, working their way up the ridge. Then suddenly, the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the chaos had been. Mara pressed herself against the boulder, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Smoke drifted across the valley floor, catching the moonlight, turning everything ghostly and unreal. She could hear her own breathing, ragged and too loud, and somewhere in the distance the scrape of boot leather on stone. Caleb remained frozen in his position, rifle tight against his shoulder, scanning the darkness for movement. He'd counted the muzzle flashes, tracked the positions, done the arithmetic in his head. Silas had brought 5 men. 2 were down for certain, 1 from Caleb's rifle, 1 from what looked like Mara's lucky shot. That left 3 plus Silas himself. 4 guns still in play. Bad odds. But Caleb had worked with worse. "Rourke!" Silas's voice rang out from somewhere in the darkness, calm and conversational, as if he were calling to a friend across a town square. "This is getting tedious. How about we talk this through like reasonable men?" Caleb didn't answer. Words were traps, and Silas was good at setting them. "I can wait all night," Silas continued. "Can you? How much ammunition you got left up there?" "Because I brought plenty, and I've got all the time in the world." Still, Caleb held his silence. He shifted position slightly, moving 2 feet to his right, watching for the muzzle flash that would tell him Silas had spotted his previous location. Nothing came. Down by the fire, Eli stood rigid beneath the noose, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. His eyes darted frantically between the shadows, trying to track where his brother might be, where Caleb was hiding, where death would come from when it finally arrived. "Tell you what," Silas said, and there was something new in his voice now, an edge of amusement that made Mara's skin crawl. "I'm going to give you a choice, Rourke. You can come down from those rocks right now, face me man to man, and we'll settle this proper. Or I can send my boys up there to dig you out, and when they do, I'll make sure you watch while I hang your lady friend from that tree right next to my brother." Mara's breath caught. She looked toward where she thought Caleb might be, willing him not to respond, not to take the bait. "Oh yes," Silas continued, his voice carrying that terrible casual quality. "I saw her shooting, not bad for a civilian. What's her story, Rourke? She your woman, or just someone unlucky enough to cross your path?" "She's got nothing to do with this," Caleb said. And the moment the words left his mouth, he knew he'd made a mistake. Silas's laughter echoed across the valley. "There you are. I was beginning to think maybe one of my boys had already put a bullet in you." A pause. "So she matters to you. Good to know." Caleb cursed himself silently. 3 years tracking Silas's men, learning their patterns, studying their methods, and he'd still fallen for the oldest trick in the book. Let emotion override discipline. Sarah's ghost whispered in his memory, her voice mixing with the smoke and gunpowder, and he pushed it down hard. No time for ghosts. Not yet. "Last chance," Silas called. "Come down and face me, or I start putting bullets in people you care about." Caleb made his decision. He stood slowly, rifle still in hand, and stepped into the open where the moonlight could catch him. Below, he saw movement as Silas emerged from cover near the base of the ridge, his duster settling around him like the wings of some carrion bird. "That's better," Silas said. "Now drop the rifle." "No." "Excuse me?" "You want me? Come take me. But I'm keeping the rifle until one of us is dead." Silas considered this, his head tilted slightly to one side. Then he smiled. "Fair enough, but your lady friend puts hers down, or my men drop her right now." Caleb looked toward Mara's position. He couldn't see her in the shadows, but he knew she was there, knew she had her rifle trained on Silas, or one of his men. "Mara, do it." "Like hell," came her reply, fierce and frightened in equal measure. "Do it. This isn't your fight." It became my fight the moment I started shooting." "Mara, no." Her voice cracked, but held. "You don't get to martyr yourself and leave me with the guilt of watching. If you're going to die on this ridge, at least let me die knowing I tried to stop it." Something twisted in Caleb's chest. Not quite hope, not quite regret, just the recognition that he'd underestimated her. Again. Silas laughed, the sound genuine and delighted. "I like her, Rourke. She's got more spine than you deserve." He took a step forward, boots crunching on loose stone. "But she's also got about 3 seconds before I have my men light her up like an Independence Day celebration. You do that, and I put a bullet through your skull before your finger clears the trigger," Caleb said flatly. "Maybe. Probably even. You were always a decent shot." Silas spread his hands. "But then we're both dead. Your lady's dead. And the only one who walks away is Eli." "That the ending you're looking for?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. My brother. Alive and walking, not dancing on a rope." Silas gestured toward the tree. "You cut him down, we ride out, and you get to live long enough to regret not killing me when you had the chance." "Not good enough." "Then make a counteroffer." The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of gun smoke and blood. Caleb's mind worked through the angles, the possibilities, trying to find a path that didn't end with everyone dead. But every scenario he played out came back to the same conclusion. This ridge, this night, was always going to end in blood. The only question was whose. "Here's my offer," Caleb said, his voice carrying across the silence. "You and me. No rifles. Just pistols. We settle this the old way, and whoever's still standing when the smoke clears gets to decide what happens to Eli." Silas's smile widened. "You want to duel me? I want to kill you. The method doesn't matter. You know I'm faster than you." "Maybe. We'll find out." For a long moment, Silas just looked at him, his dark eyes reflecting the distant firelight. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. I accept. But we do it right. Walk 10 paces, turn and draw. None of this quick draw nonsense. Fine. Your men hold their fire. So does Mara." "Agreed." Silas turned toward the shadows where his remaining men were concealed. "Boys, you hear that? Nobody shoots unless Rourke cheats, which he won't, because he's got too much pride for that." Caleb looked toward Mara's position. "You heard the deal. Hold your fire no matter what happens." "This is insane," she called back. "Probably. Do it anyway." He could almost hear her internal struggle, the war between wanting to intervene and knowing that any shot she took would trigger a massacre. Finally, reluctantly, she said, "All right, but if you die, I'm shooting him anyway." "Fair enough." Caleb started down the slope, moving carefully over the loose rock, his rifle held in one hand. When he reached the valley floor, he set the Winchester against a boulder, well away from where the duel would take place. Silas did the same with his own rifle, and they met in the open ground between the fire and the tree. Up close, Silas was even more imposing, half a head taller than Caleb, with shoulders like an ox and hands that looked like they could break bone without effort. But it was his eyes that told the real story, cold, empty. The eyes of a man who'd killed so many times that it no longer registered as anything more significant than swatting a fly. "You really think this is going to bring her back?" Silas asked quietly, his voice pitched so only Caleb could hear. "Think killing me is going to fill that hole she left?" No, Caleb said, but it'll stop you from making more holes in other people. Noble, stupid, but noble. Silas adjusted his gun belt, checking that his Colt sat easy in its holster. You know, I actually respect what you've done. Hunting down my men one by one. That takes patience, dedication. Most men would have just gotten drunk and put a bullet in their own head. I thought about it. Why didn't you? Because dying would have let you win. Silas nodded, something almost like understanding in his expression. Then let's see if living does. They turned back to back, standing in the space between firelight and shadow. Eli watched from beneath the noose, his face white as bone. Mara held her position in the rocks, her finger resting on the trigger guard, ready but not yet committed. Somewhere in the darkness, Silas's men waited with their own weapons trained, ready to turn this whole ridge into a graveyard if the wrong man fell. "Count it off, little brother," Silas called. Eli's voice shook, but he managed to get the words out. 1. Caleb took his first step, his boots loud against the stone. 2. They moved in sync, walking away from each other, the distance growing with each count. 3. Caleb's hand hovered near his Colt, not touching, just waiting. His breathing steadied. Everything else fell away. The cold, the fear, the 3 years of grief and rage. There was only this moment, this single point in time where everything would be decided. 4. He could hear Silas's boots behind him, steady and unhurried. The man wasn't nervous, wasn't scared. He was just waiting, confident in his speed, in his skill, in his utter lack of hesitation. 5. Caleb thought of Sarah. Not the way she'd died, but the way she'd lived. Her laugh. The way she'd looked at him in the morning light. The plans they'd made for a future that would never come. He'd carried those memories like stones for 3 years, letting them weigh him down, grinding him into the dust. But here, now, in this final moment, he let them go. Not forgetting, just releasing. 6. The wind died. The world held its breath. 7. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The sound was lonely and wild and utterly indifferent to what was about to happen on this ridge. 8. Caleb's fingers flexed, preparing. Muscle memory taking over. Thousands of hours of practice condensed into a single motion that would have to be perfect or it would be his last. 9. He could feel Silas behind him, a presence in the darkness, a weight in the air. They were connected now, bound by violence and vengeance and the iron certainty that only one of them would walk away from this place. 10. They turned. Caleb's hand dropped to his Colt, wrapping around the worn grip, thumb finding the hammer as his finger slipped inside the trigger guard. The world slowed, every detail sharp and bright, the firelight dancing across Silas's face, the moonlight glinting off metal, the fraction of a second where everything balanced on the edge of a knife. Silas was fast, faster than anyone Caleb had ever seen. His draw was a blur, his Colt clearing leather and coming up with the smooth inevitability of sunrise. But Caleb had never planned to outdraw him. His shot came low, fired from the hip the moment the barrel cleared his holster. No aiming, no time for that. Just muscle memory and desperation and the absolute commitment to dying if it meant taking Silas with him. The 2 shots came so close together, they almost sounded like one. Almost. Caleb felt the impact, a hammer blow to his left shoulder that spun him halfway around and dropped him to one knee. His Colt fell from suddenly nerveless fingers clattering on stone. The pain came a heartbeat later, white hot and absolute, spreading like wildfire through his chest and arm. But he'd hit his target. Silas stood swaying, his Colt hanging loose in his hand, a red stain spreading across his chest just below the ribs. His face registered surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. He took one step forward, then another, his free hand going to the wound. "Well," he said, and blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "Well." He raised his Colt, trying to bring it to bear on Caleb's kneeling form. His hand shook. The barrel wavered. He pulled the trigger, and the shot went wild, kicking up dust 3 feet to Caleb's right. Caleb reached for his own gun with his right hand, his left arm hanging useless. His fingers found the grip, lifted it, the weight almost too much but not quite. Silas fired again, closer this time. close enough that Caleb felt the bullet pass through the air beside his head. Caleb aimed carefully, taking his time despite the pain screaming through his shoulder. He centered the sight on Silas's chest, right over his heart, and breathed out slowly. "For Sarah," he whispered, and pulled the trigger. The shot took Silas in the center of his chest, punching through bone and muscle and everything vital beneath. He rocked back on his heels, his eyes going wide, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. His Colt slipped from his fingers, falling end over end until it hit the ground and discharged, the bullet ricocheting off stone and disappearing into the night. Then Silas fell. He went down hard, all his strength leaving him at once, his body hitting the ground with a sound like a side of beef dropping from a hook. He lay there, staring up at the stars, blood pooling beneath him in a spreading dark stain. Caleb managed to get to his feet, swaying, his vision graying at the edges. He walked over to where Silas lay, each step an agony, and looked down at the man who'd taken everything from him. Silas's eyes found his. They were still bright, still aware, but fading fast. "You got me," Silas rasped, blood on his lips. Didn't think you had it in you." "I didn't," Caleb said, "but Sarah did. She was stronger than both of us." Silas tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough. Guess that makes her the winner." "She was always going to be the winner. You just didn't know her well enough to realize it." Silas's eyes started to dim. His breathing went shallow, then shallower still. He opened his mouth to say something else, but whatever it was got lost somewhere between intention and execution. His eyes went still, fixed on something far beyond the stars, and the last breath rattled out of him like wind through dead leaves. Silas Cade was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. No gunfire, no voices, just the wind and the crackle of the dying fire, and the sound of Caleb's own ragged breathing. Then all hell broke loose for the second time that night. Silas's men opened fire from the darkness, abandoning any pretense of honor or restraint. Bullets whined through the air, striking all around Caleb. He dove for cover, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest, and barely made it behind a boulder before the rock face where he'd been standing exploded into fragments. Mara returned fire immediately, her rifle barking 3 times in rapid succession. One of the muzzle flashes winked out with a strangled cry. 2 left. Caleb fumbled for his Colt with his good hand, managed to scoop it up despite the shaking in his fingers. He leaned around the boulder and fired twice blindly in the direction of the remaining shooters. The range was too great for accurate pistol work, but maybe it would make them think twice about rushing his position. One of Silas's men broke cover, running low and fast across the open ground toward the ridge where Mara was positioned. She saw him coming, swung her rifle around, and fired. The shot took him in the leg, dropping him in a screaming heap. He tried to crawl the rest of the way, still clutching his rifle, until Mara's second shot ended his struggle permanently. That left one. The last shooter was smart. He didn't move, didn't give away his position, just laid down steady, suppressing fire, keeping both Caleb and Mara pinned while he worked out his next move. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, filling the air with stone chips and the smell of hot metal. Then a new rifle joined the fight. The shot came from up on the ridge, from a position neither Caleb nor Mara occupied. It was clean and professional, and it dropped Silas's last man before he could turn to face the new threat. Silence fell again, this time complete. Caleb stayed behind his boulder, trying to understand what had just happened. Then a voice called down from the ridge, familiar and unwelcome. "That's all of them, Rourke. You can come out." Finn Darrow. Caleb stood slowly, his left arm cradled against his chest, blood soaking through his shirt. He looked up toward where the voice had come from and saw 2 figures silhouetted against the stars. Finn and Boone, rifles in hand, looking down at the carnage they'd just helped create. "You shot one of my problems," Caleb called up. "Thanks, I guess." "Don't mention it." Finn started down the slope, moving carefully over the loose rock. Boone followed, keeping his rifle ready. When they reached the valley floor, they walked past Silas's body without a second glance, heading straight for the tree where Eli still stood beneath the noose. "We had a deal," Finn said. "Or you had a deal with Silas, anyway. Either way, it's done now. So we're taking Eli to Santa Cruz for that pardon." Caleb looked at them, then at Eli, then at the spreading pool of blood beneath Silas's body. Everything hurt. His shoulder was on fire, his vision kept trying to gray out, and his legs felt like they might give out any second. He'd done what he came to do. Silas was dead. Sarah was avenged. The 3-year wait was finally lifted. The bounty didn't matter anymore. The money never mattered. "Take him," Caleb said. Finn blinked, clearly surprised. "Just like that? Just like that? Get him to Santa Cruz, claim your pardon. I'm done." Boone moved to the tree and started working on the knots that held Eli's noose. The rope came free, and Eli staggered forward, gasping, his hands going to his throat where the hemp had left raw burns. "What about you?" Finn asked, looking at the blood-soaking Caleb's shirt. "I'll manage." "You're bleeding pretty good. That shoulder needs tending." "I've had worse." Finn hesitated, then nodded. He and Boone gathered Eli between them, supporting his weight, and started walking him toward where their horses were hidden. At the edge of the firelight, Finn paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, Rourke, I'm sorry about your wife." Caleb didn't answer, just stood there, swaying slightly, watching them disappear into the darkness. When they were gone, when their footsteps had faded to nothing, he let himself sit down heavily on a flat rock. Mara appeared from the shadows, moving quickly, her rifle slung over her shoulder and her face tight with worry. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already working to peel back his shirt and examine the wound. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad enough. Bullet's still in there, and you're losing blood faster than you should." Her hands were steady despite the tremor in her voice. "We need to get this bleeding stopped, get that bullet out, and get you somewhere with actual medical supplies." "Santa Cruz." "Can you ride that far?" Caleb looked down at his shoulder, at the blood still seeping through Mara's makeshift bandage. "Guess I'll find out." She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight when his legs tried to buckle. Together they walked to where the horses were tied, and Mara helped him into the saddle. The pain of mounting made him see stars, but he gritted his teeth and stayed conscious through sheer stubbornness. "What about him?" Mara asked, gesturing toward Silas's body. "Leave him. The scavengers will take care of it." "That's cold." "That's what he deserves." They rode out slowly, leaving Hangtree Ridge and its dead behind them. The fire had burned down to coals now, providing just enough light to see the bodies scattered across the valley floor. Silas's men. The price of his vengeance, the cost of 3 years' worth of grief. As they climbed up out of the valley, Caleb looked back one last time. He could just make out the shape of the hanging tree, its skeletal branches reaching toward the sky, and beneath it the dark shape that had been Silas Cade. "Is it worth it?" Mara asked quietly. "All this death, all this blood, just for revenge?" Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "It's not about worth, it's about balance. Silas took a life that mattered to me, now he's paid for it. And Sarah, does this bring her back?" "No, nothing brings her back." He adjusted his grip on the reins, his left arm still useless against his chest. "But at least now when I close my eyes, I won't see her burning. I'll just see her the way she was. And maybe that's enough." They rode on through the darkness, heading north toward Santa Cruz and whatever waited there. Behind them, Hangtree Ridge settled back into silence, just another haunted place in a landscape full of ghosts. The wind swept across the valley floor, scattering dust over bloodstains, beginning the slow work of erasing what had happened here. But Caleb would remember, would carry it with him for whatever years remained, not as a burden anymore, but as a marker, the place where one man's long hunt finally ended, and maybe, just maybe, another man's chance at peace began. The moon rode high and cold above them, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to justice or vengeance or the thin line that separated them. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Santa Cruz waited with its own promises and lies, its own stories of violence and survival. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Caleb Rourke had done what he'd set out to do 3 years ago when he'd crawled from the ashes of his burning home and swore an oath to make things right. Silas Cade was dead. And somehow, impossibly, Caleb was still alive. The ride to Santa Cruz took 2 days that felt like 2 years. Caleb drifted in and out of consciousness, his body fighting the wound and the infection that was already setting in, despite Mara's best efforts to keep it clean. She'd used whiskey from Caleb's saddlebag to sterilize the bullet hole as best she could, then packed it with strips torn from her own petticoat and bound it tight. It was crude field medicine, the kind that either worked or didn't, with no middle ground. They moved slowly, stopping frequently to rest the horses and check Caleb's bandages. Each time they stopped, the blood had soaked through a little more, the red stain spreading like some awful flower blooming against white fabric. Mara changed the dressing when she could, her hands steady even as her eyes betrayed her worry. "You need a real doctor," she said on the morning of the second day, watching him struggle to mount the dun. His face had gone gray, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold dawn air. "I need to get to Santa Cruz," he said through gritted teeth. "Everything else comes after. You won't make it to Santa Cruz if you bleed out first. Then I guess we better ride faster." But they couldn't ride faster. Caleb's strength was failing, his body using everything it had just to keep his heart beating and his lungs working. By midday, Mara had to tie him to the saddle to keep him from falling. He protested weakly, his pride warring with necessity. But in the end, necessity won. It always did. The land changed as they traveled north. The harsh desert gave way to scrub hills, then to grassland that rolled like a green ocean toward distant mountains. They passed scattered ranches, their buildings small and lonely against the vast sky, and once they saw a freight wagon in the distance, heading south with a load of timber. Mara considered flagging it down, asking for help, but Caleb stirred enough to shake his head. "Keep moving," he mumbled. "Almost there." "Almost where?" "You don't even know where we're going." "Santa Cruz. Find your husband. Get me to a doctor. Everything else works itself out." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to point out that he was delirious and probably dying, and that nothing was working itself out. But she kept her mouth shut and kept them moving north, following the road that wound through the hills like a scar through flesh. They saw Santa Cruz first as a smudge on the horizon, brown buildings against brown earth, barely distinguishable from the land itself. As they drew closer, details emerged. A main street lined with false front buildings, a church with a white steeple, corrals and livery stables at the edge of town, and people, actual people, moving through the streets, going about their lives as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis back at Hangtree Ridge. Mara guided them down the main street, drawing curious stares from the locals. A man covered in blood tied to his horse wasn't an uncommon sight on the frontier, but it was never a good one. She stopped in front of a building with a painted sign that read Dr. Samuel Bridger, physician and surgeon, and called out for help. Two men emerged from the general store across the street, followed by an older woman in a flour-dusted apron. The woman took one look at Caleb and started barking orders. "Get him down from there. Careful with that shoulder. Someone fetch the doctor. Tell him it's urgent." She turned to Mara. "You his wife?" "No, just traveling together." "Well, you did good getting him here alive. That wound looks 3 days old." "2," Mara said. "It happened 2 nights ago." "Then you did very good." The woman helped guide Caleb's unconscious form as the men lifted him from the saddle. "I'm Martha Henley. Run the boarding house down the street. You'll need a room and a hot meal, looks like. I need to find someone first. A man named Jacob Vance. He came through here about a week ago, said he was arranging business." Martha's expression shifted, something complicated passing behind her eyes. "Jacob Vance. Yes, I know him. Stayed at my boarding house for 2 nights before he left." "Left? Left where?" "He didn't say. Just settled his bill and rode out one morning. Seemed agitated, worried maybe." Mara's heart sank. "Did he say anything? Leave any message?" "Not with me, but you might ask at the land office. He spent a fair amount of time there talking to the clerk." The doctor arrived then, a thin man with wire spectacles and hands that moved with practiced efficiency. He took one look at Caleb's shoulder and said, "Get him inside, now." They carried Caleb into the doctor's office and laid him on a table in a back room that smelled of carbolic acid and old blood. Dr. Bridger cut away the bandages, examined the wound with careful fingers, and let out a low whistle. "Bullet's still in there, sitting right against the bone. Another day and the infection would have killed him." He looked at Mara. "You the one who dressed this?" "Yes." "You probably saved his life. Not many people would think to use alcohol to clean it." He rolled up his sleeves. "I'll need to operate. It's going to take a while, and he's going to need rest afterward. You have money for medical care?" Mara hesitated. She had a little money, but not much, certainly not enough for surgery and recovery. But before she could answer, the doctor waved a hand. Never mind, we'll work it out later. Right now, I just need to keep this man from dying on my table. He pointed toward the door. You should wait outside. This isn't going to be pleasant to watch. Mara wanted to stay, wanted to see it through, but she could see in the doctor's eyes that she'd just be in the way. She nodded and stepped outside, closing the door behind her. The surgery took 3 hours. Mara spent them sitting on a bench outside the doctor's office, watching the town move around her. Santa Cruz was bigger than she'd expected. Maybe 200 people, with businesses that suggested permanence. A bank, a hotel, a telegraph office. The kind of town where people put down roots and built lives, not just passed through on their way to somewhere else. Jacob had wanted this, had wanted them to find a place like Santa Cruz and build something that lasted. But Jacob was gone, and Mara was beginning to accept that wherever he'd gone, it wasn't anywhere she could follow. When Dr. Bridger finally emerged, his shirt was stained with blood and his face was drawn with exhaustion. But he was smiling. He's alive. Bullets out, wounds clean, and I've stitched him up proper. He'll need rest, lots of it, and he'll probably have limited use of that arm for a while. But barring complications, he should recover. Mara felt something break loose in her chest, some tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Can I see him? He's sleeping. Best to let him rest for now. Come back this evening, and you can sit with him if you like. Bridger wiped his hands on a towel. Now, about payment. I'll handle it. Both Mara and the doctor turned. A man stood at the edge of the street, tall and lean, with a badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff's badge, worn and tarnished, but unmistakable. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors, with lines around his eyes that suggested he'd seen more than his share of trouble. Sheriff Garrett, Dr. Bridger said. This is unexpected. Heard there was a man shot up coming into town. Figured I should take an interest. Garrett walked closer, his eyes on Mara. You the one who brought him in? Yes. Mind telling me what happened? Mara chose her words carefully. We were traveling from the south, ran into some trouble with outlaws. There was a fight. People died. We rode here for help. Outlaws. Garrett's tone suggested he'd heard that story before and didn't quite believe it. These outlaws have names? Silas Cade. The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Garrett's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Silas Cade is dead? Yes. You see it happen? I was there. And the man inside, he the one who killed Silas? Yes. Garrett absorbed this, his face unreadable. Then he said, I'll need to talk to him when he wakes up, get the full story. But if what you're saying is true, if Silas Cade is really dead, then your friend just did the territory a considerable service. He looked at Dr. Bridger. Send me the bill for his medical care. Town will cover it. That's generous, Bridger said, surprised. That's politics. Army's been trying to run down Silas Cade for 2 years. If some bounty hunter managed to do what they couldn't, least we can do is patch him up and say thank you. Garrett tipped his hat to Mara. Ma'am, I'll be back to take your statement later. In the meantime, get some rest. You look like you need it. He walked away, his boots loud on the wooden sidewalk. Mara watched him go, feeling the weight of the last few days pressing down on her shoulders. She'd thought getting to Santa Cruz would solve her problems. Instead, it had just created new ones. Martha Henley appeared at her elbow, as if summoned by thought. Come on, dear. Let's get you fed and cleaned up. You can have a room at the boarding house. No charge for the first night. Consider it payment for bringing some excitement to our quiet little town. Mara wanted to protest, but she was too tired to argue. She let Martha guide her down the street to a 2-story building with a hand-painted sign that read, Henley's Boarding House. Inside it was clean and well-kept, with lace curtains and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. Martha showed her to a small room on the 2nd floor, then brought up a basin of hot water and a bar of soap. Clean yourself up, then come down for supper. I'll have questions, but they can wait until you've got some food in you. Mara stripped off her trail-stained clothes and washed away 2 days of dust and blood. The water in the basin turned brown, then gray, then pink as she scrubbed. When she was done, she felt almost human again. Martha had left a clean dress hanging on a hook, simple calico, a little too big, but it fit well enough. Downstairs, Martha had set out a meal that made Mara's mouth water. Roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables that actually had color. Mara ate slowly at first, then faster as her body reminded her how long it had been since she'd had a real meal. Martha sat across from her, sipping coffee and watching with the satisfied expression of someone who enjoyed feeding hungry people. "So," Martha said when Mara had finally pushed back from the table, "you want to tell me the real story?" Mara did. Not all of it. Some things were too raw, too personal, but enough. She told Martha about the station, about Caleb and Eli, about the long ride north and the men following them. She told her about Hangtree Ridge and the gunfight and Silas Cade's death. She left out the part about Caleb's wife and the fire in Amarillo. That wasn't her story to tell. When she finished, Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your husband, Jacob. I remember him now. He came in looking for work, said he needed to earn enough to send for his wife. Seemed like a good man. Earnest." "He was." Mara shook her head. "I don't know anymore." "He's at the old Sanderson Ranch," Martha said quietly. Mara's head snapped up. "What?" "About 10 miles east of town. Old man Sanderson died last winter, left no heirs. The ranch has been sitting empty, going to seed. Your husband showed up and started working it, fixing the fences, clearing the barn. Sheriff asked him what he was doing, and he said he was going to buy it. Had some money saved up, enough for a down payment." "Jacob doesn't have money saved up. We've been broke for years." Martha's expression was sympathetic. "Then maybe he found some. Or maybe he was lying. Either way, he's out there. Has been for the last 5 days." Mara stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need to see him." "Not tonight, you don't. It's getting dark and that road's not safe after sundown. Go first thing in the morning." Martha stood as well, placing a gentle hand on Mara's arm. "Besides, you need rest. Whatever you're going to say to him, you'll say it better after a good night's sleep." Mara wanted to argue, but she knew Martha was right. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically. A confrontation with Jacob right now would end badly for both of them. "All right," she said. "First thing in the morning." That night, she lay in a real bed for the first time in weeks, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had led her to this moment. Jacob's disappearance, Caleb's quest for revenge, the violence at Hangtree Ridge. It all felt like pieces of different stories that had somehow gotten tangled together, and she was still trying to figure out which story was hers. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. Martha had breakfast waiting, eggs and bacon and more of that incredible bread. Mara ate quickly, then borrowed a horse from Martha's stable and rode east out of town. The Sanderson Ranch wasn't hard to find. It sat in a valley between 2 low hills, the buildings clustered around a spring that fed a small creek. The house was adobe, weathered but solid, and the barn had a new roof that stood out bright against the old timbers. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as Mara rode closer, she could see a figure working in the corral. Jacob. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face tanned darker from long hours in the sun, but it was definitely him. Her husband. The man who'd promised her a ranch and a future and then disappeared without a word. He looked up as she approached, and his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, fear, and finally something that might have been relief. He set down the post he'd been working on and walked to meet her. "Mara," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. She dismounted, her hands trembling with anger and grief and a dozen other emotions she couldn't name. "You left me at that station for 6 days, Jacob. 6 days I waited, not knowing if you were alive or dead. I can explain." "You better." Her voice was hard, colder than she'd ever heard it. "You better have a damn good explanation for why I had to ride through hostile country with a bounty hunter and a murderer and nearly get killed 6 times just to find you playing rancher on someone else's land." Jacob flinched. "It's not someone else's land, it's mine. Ours, if you'll have it." "How? We don't have money for land." "I did a job down in Presidio before I met you at the station. A man hired me to run a message to someone in Santa Cruz. Paid me $500, cash money." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "That was enough for the down payment on this place. The bank's holding the deed until I pay the rest, but it's ours, Mara. Everything I promised you, everything we talked about." Mara stared at the paper, then at him. You left me alone at a dying station in the middle of nowhere for $500? I left you to secure our future. I was going to come back for you, I swear. But then the deal took longer than I expected, and I needed to put the money down before someone else grabbed this place, and he stopped, seeing the expression on her face. I'm sorry. I should have sent word. Should have come back sooner. I just wanted to have something to show you. Something real. You wanted to be the hero, Mara said quietly. You wanted to ride back to that station with the deed in your hand and tell me you'd done it. You'd finally made good on all those promises. Yes. Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. Is that so wrong? Mara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man she'd married, but the boy he'd never quite stopped being. Always chasing the next opportunity, the next big score, the next chance to prove he was worth something. And in his chase, he'd left her behind to fend for herself. It's wrong when your wife nearly dies because you couldn't be bothered to send a message, she said. It's wrong when you put your pride ahead of her safety. And it's wrong when you think a piece of paper makes up for abandoning her. I didn't abandon you. Yes, Jacob, you did. Maybe not permanently, maybe not with cruel intent, but you left me alone and scared and not knowing if I'd ever see you again. That's abandonment, no matter how you dress it up. Jacob's face crumpled. What do you want me to say? I'm sorry. I made a mistake, but I was trying to give us the life we always wanted. The life you wanted, Mara corrected. I just wanted a husband I could count on, someone who'd stay, someone who wouldn't leave me behind the moment something more exciting came along. She took a breath, steadying herself. But I understand now that's never going to be you. You're always going to be chasing something just over the next hill, and I'm always going to be the one waiting behind. So what are you saying? Mara looked at the ranch, at the house with its new smoke rising, at the land rolling away toward the horizon. It was beautiful. It was everything they'd talked about during those long nights on the trail, during the years of moving from one failed venture to the next. And it meant nothing. I'm saying you can have your ranch, Jacob, but you're going to have it without me. The words hung between them, final and irrevocable. Jacob started to speak, to argue, to make promises he'd never keep. But Mara had already turned away, was already mounting her horse, was already riding back toward Santa Cruz and whatever came next. Behind her, Jacob called her name. She didn't look back. When she reached town, she went straight to the doctor's office. Dr. Bridger met her at the door, looking tired but satisfied. He's awake, he said, asking for water and complaining about the pain. Both good signs. Can I see him? Of course, but don't tire him out. He needs rest more than conversation. Mara entered the back room where Caleb lay propped up on pillows, his left shoulder wrapped in clean white bandages. His face was still pale, but his eyes were clear and focused. He looked at her and managed a weak smile. You made it, he said, his voice rough but stronger than she'd expected. We both did. She pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. How do you feel? Like I got shot, but alive, so that's something. He shifted position slightly, wincing. The doctor says I was lucky. Another day and the infection would have finished what Silas started. You have me to thank for that. I'm the one who got you here. I know. Thank you. He was quiet for a moment. Did you find him? Your husband? Yes. And I'm not going back to him. Mara looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. Turns out he bought a ranch with money from some job he never told me about. Left me at that station while he was out here playing settler. When I confronted him, all he could talk about was how he did it for us, for our future. But he did it for himself. He's always done everything for himself. Caleb nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be. I think I knew it for a while now. I just needed to see it with my own eyes before I could accept it. She looked up at him. What about you? Now that Silas is dead, now that it's over, what are you going to do? Caleb stared at the ceiling for a long moment. I don't know, he said finally. For 3 years, all I've thought about is finding Silas and making him pay. I didn't plan for what came after. Didn't think there'd be an after. But there is. Yeah, there is. He turned his head to look at her. What are you going to do? I don't know either. I've got a little money saved, enough to get me somewhere, start over, maybe find work. Build something that's mine instead of always being part of someone else's dream. That's a good plan. It's not much of a plan, but it's honest. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side scarred but standing. Finally, Caleb spoke again. When I'm healed up enough to ride, I'm heading west. Heard there's work in California for men who know how to handle themselves. Security jobs, guard work, that kind of thing. Nothing glamorous, but honest. If you wanted to ride that way too, I wouldn't mind the company. Mara considered this. A few days ago, the offer would have felt like charity, but now it just felt like possibility. Two broken people finding their way towards something better. I'll think about it, she said. Caleb smiled. That's all I'm asking. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Mara stayed at the boarding house, helping Martha with chores to pay for her room. Caleb recovered slowly, regaining strength day by day. Sheriff Garrett came by to take their statements about what happened at Hangtree Ridge, seemed satisfied with their story, and didn't press for details they weren't willing to give. Word came back from the territorial marshal's office confirming that Silas Cade's body had been found where they'd left it. A scout from the army had ridden out to verify, reported back that it was definitely Silas, and that was that. 3 years of the army hunting him, and a bounty hunter had done the job in one night. The town council voted to give Caleb a reward. Not the bounty, since technically Silas had never had official paper on him, but a stipend for services rendered to the territory. $500, presented in a ceremony at the town hall that Caleb attended with his arm in a sling and a look of deep discomfort on his face. Finn, Darrow, and Boone showed up one afternoon, having successfully delivered Eli to the territorial prison and claimed their pardons. They looked relieved and younger somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. They thanked Caleb for not shooting them when he had the chance, tipped their hats to Mara, and rode off toward whatever new life their clean slates would allow. Jacob sent a letter. Mara didn't open it. She left it with Martha, who put it in a drawer and said nothing. 3 weeks after Hangtree Ridge, Dr. Bridger declared Caleb fit to ride. The shoulder would never be quite right. The bullet had done too much damage to bone and muscle for a full recovery. But he could use the arm well enough. More importantly, the infection was gone, the wound was healed, and the nightmares that had plagued his sleep were finally starting to fade. Caleb settled his bill with the doctor, paid Martha for Mara's room even though she protested, and bought supplies for the ride west. Then he went to the boarding house and knocked on Mara's door. I'm leaving tomorrow, he said when she opened it. Heading west, like I said. The offer still stands if you want to ride along. Mara looked at him, this broken man who'd helped her survive when he could have left her behind. She thought about Jacob and the ranch and the life that had never really been hers. She thought about the road west and all the uncertainty it held. And she thought about who she wanted to be when the dust finally settled. I'll be ready at dawn, she said. They left Santa Cruz as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The town was quiet behind them, still sleeping, and ahead the road stretched empty and infinite. Mara rode Jacob's bay mare. She'd kept the horse, if nothing else from her marriage, and Caleb sat easy on the dun, his healed shoulder stiff but functional. They didn't talk much as they rode. There wasn't much that needed saying. They were two people leaving their pasts behind, riding toward futures they couldn't quite see yet. But for the first time in longer than either could remember, that uncertainty felt like freedom instead of fear. Around mid-morning, they stopped to rest the horses by a creek that ran clear and cold from the mountains. Caleb dismounted carefully, favoring his shoulder, and led the dun to drink. Mara did the same with the bay, and they stood side by side watching the water flow. You think we'll make it? Mara asked. To California, I mean, or wherever we end up. I don't know, Caleb said honestly. But I figure if we survived Hangtree Ridge, we can survive just about anything. That's either optimistic or delusional. Probably both. He smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. But I'm willing to find out if you are. Mara smiled back. I think I am. They mounted up and rode on, leaving the creek behind. The land opened up before them, vast and wild and full of possibilities. Somewhere behind them lay the graves of who they used to be. Sarah, buried in Amarillo. Silas, left for the scavengers at Hangtree Ridge. Jacob, alive but dead to Mara all the same. But ahead lay only road and sky and the chance to be something new. Caleb had spent 3 years hunting revenge, carrying the weight of his grief like a stone around his neck. Now, with Silas dead and the debt paid, he felt lighter than he had in years. Not healed. He'd never be fully healed, and he knew it, but no longer drowning. He could breathe again, could look at the horizon without seeing fire and smoke, could close his eyes without hearing screams. Sarah would always be with him, the memory of her, the love they'd shared, the life that had been stolen. But she was no longer a weight pulling him down. She was just a part of who he'd been, folded into who he was becoming. And Mara, riding beside him with her face turned toward the west and the future, understood that. She carried her own ghosts, her own losses, her own hard-won lessons about trust and disappointment and the courage it took to start over. They didn't need to talk about it. They just needed to keep riding. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool. The road wound through hills that were greener here, more alive, with grass that rippled in the wind like water. They passed a ranch where cattle grazed behind split-rail fences, and a farmer waved to them from his field. They waved back. Two strangers among strangers, anonymous and free. By late afternoon, they could see mountains in the distance, blue and hazy against the sky. California was still weeks away, across those peaks in the desert beyond. But it was out there, waiting, and for the first time in a long time, waiting didn't feel like torture. They made camp that night beside a stand of cottonwoods, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Caleb built a small fire while Mara tended the horses, and they ate a simple meal of beans and coffee. The stars came out, bright and numberless, and the moon rose full and white. "You ever think about settling down?" Mara asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Finding a place and staying there?" Caleb considered this. "Used to, before, but now." He shook his head. "I don't know if I'm built for settling anymore. 3 years on the move, hunting and running, and never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. That does something to a man. Changes how you see the world. Maybe. Or maybe you just haven't found the right place yet. Maybe." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "What about you? You planning to settle, or are you just running?" "Both, probably. I'm running from what was, but I'm hoping to find what could be." She wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I just know I can't go back. Not to Jacob, not to that life. Forward's the only direction that makes sense anymore." Caleb nodded. He understood that better than most. Forward was all he had too. They took turns keeping watch, though the night passed quietly without threat. When dawn came, they broke camp and rode on, following the road west toward whatever waited there. The weeks that followed were hard but good. They crossed mountains where snow still clung to the high passes, descended into valleys where fruit trees bloomed in white and pink profusion, passed through towns that were barely more than a few buildings clustered around a crossroads. They worked odd jobs when they needed money, Caleb as a guard, Mara as a cook or laundress, and they kept moving, always moving, following the sun toward the coast. And somewhere along that road, something shifted between them. Not romance exactly. Both of them were too bruised for that, too aware of all the ways love could turn to ashes. But partnership, friendship, the quiet understanding that came from shared survival. They learned each other's silences, the small tells that meant trouble or fatigue or the need for solitude. They learned to work together, to cover each other's weaknesses and trust each other's strengths. And slowly, carefully, they began to build something that felt almost like hope. It was Mara who first saw the ocean. They'd been riding for 6 weeks, crossing the final range of coastal mountains, when the road crested a ridge, and there it was, a vast expanse of blue stretching to the horizon, glittering in the afternoon sun like a promise made manifest. "Is that—" she started, then stopped, speechless. "California," Caleb said quietly. "The Pacific." They stood there for a long time, just looking, letting the sight of all that water wash over them. Then, without a word, they rode down toward the coast. The town they found was called Monterey, a fishing village built around a natural harbor. It smelled of salt and fish and possibility. They found rooms at a boarding house run by a widow who asked no questions, and they spent the next few days just resting, letting the rhythm of the waves replace the rhythm of hoofbeats. On the 3rd day, Caleb went down to the docks and found work as security for a shipping company. The pay was decent, the hours reasonable, and nobody cared about his past as long as he could handle himself if trouble came. which it sometimes did, but never more than he could manage. Mara found work at a restaurant, cooking meals for fishermen and travelers. She had a gift for it, a way of making simple food taste like home. The owner offered her a permanent position after a week, and she accepted. They fell into a routine: work during the day, quiet evenings at the boarding house, walks along the beach when time allowed. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was theirs, built from nothing and belonging to no one else. One evening, about 3 months after they'd arrived, Mara and Caleb walked along the beach as the sun set, turning the ocean gold and crimson. The sand was cool beneath their feet, and gulls wheeled overhead, crying their lonesome songs. "You happy here?" Mara asked. Caleb thought about it. Happy wasn't quite the right word. He'd never be happy the way he'd been happy with Sarah, that uncomplicated joy of a life stretching out ahead with no shadows to darken it. But he was content, at peace maybe, or as close to it as he was likely to get. "I'm alive," he said finally. "After Hangtree Ridge, I wasn't sure I would be, but I am, and I'm not alone. So yeah, I guess I'm happy enough." "That's a low bar." "It's an honest one," Mara smiled. "I suppose it is." She stopped walking and turned to face the ocean, her hair whipping in the wind. "I've been thinking about buying into the restaurant. The owner's getting old, wants to retire. She offered to sell me half partnership if I can come up with the money." "That's a big step." "It is. It means staying here, putting down roots, being part of something permanent." She looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think if it's what you want, you should do it. You've earned the right to build something that's yours." "And you? You planning to stay in Monterey?" Caleb looked out at the ocean, at the endless water rolling toward the shore. Part of him still itched to move, to keep drifting, to never stay anywhere long enough to put down roots that could be torn up. But another part, the part that was tired of running, tired of hunting, tired of living with ghosts, wanted to stay. To see if maybe, just maybe, he could build a life that didn't end in fire and screaming. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, I think I might stay." Mara's smile widened. "Good, because I'd miss you if you left." "I'd miss you too." They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The ocean breathed in and out, eternal and indifferent, and somewhere far to the east, Hangtree Ridge stood silent beneath the stars, its dead tree bearing witness to nothing but wind and dust. Caleb Rourke had ridden into that valley carrying 3 years of grief and rage, determined to balance the scales or die trying. He'd come out the other side alive, broken but healing, the weight of his vengeance finally lifted. And now, standing on a beach half a continent away with a friend beside him and a future, uncertain but real, stretching out ahead, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt free. The past would always be there, carved into his bones like the scar on his face. Sarah's memory, Silas's death, the long bloody trail between them. But it didn't own him anymore. Didn't define every breath, every choice, every moment. He was more than his grief now, more than his revenge. He was just a man, standing on a beach, watching the sun go down. And that was enough. Mara started back toward town, and Caleb fell into step beside her. They walked in comfortable silence, their shadows long on the sand, the sound of the waves following them home. Somewhere ahead, the lights of Monterey glowed warm against the gathering dark. Somewhere behind, the road they'd traveled stretched back across deserts and mountains to places they'd never returned to. And somewhere between those 2 points, between what was and what could be, Caleb Rourke found the thing he'd been searching for all along. Not vengeance, not justice, not even peace exactly, just the simple, hard-won freedom to walk away from who he'd been and become who he was meant to be. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered.